how's she doing? Is she in a facility or?
No. She lives by herself. She lives in her house. She's lived in the same house since she's been married. For, let's see, how old is David?
Hello, everyone at home. We are on chapter 10. All right, and we just read verses 10, 1 to 13. And just want to invite anything that stuck out to you. I was going to say that my subsection is called Salvation is for All. A lot of parentheticals in here from Paul too. Yeah.
I really like verse 12. There's no distinction between Jew and Greek, because the same Lord is Lord of all, who gives richly to all who call on him. Because I personally sort of translate that into being all, meaning all who look to a higher power. That, I'm probably wrong, but that's probably not what they meant, but beautiful praise.
It is, and it's a refrain of sorts that Paul is often returns to, and we've talked about it many times before. But it's kind of important, and it's very radical for its time. And there are many ways we could say it with using different examples than Jew and Greek today. But the idea that the Christ that we pray to, we were just saying prayers before we began about the Episcopal Church. The pride I feel, for example, of the Episcopal Church is that we're but one branch of, as our presiding bishop likes to say, the Jesus movement. But we are also holding that in belief, that God's love is and saving acts are for all people, regardless of their faith tradition. And that's sometimes hard to kind of juggle those two thoughts, that we believe this is the right way to worship, the right path to access God and all, but we're also mindful that, God is bigger than that as well. So that's also kind of what we're into with Jew and Greek. Go ahead, Dawn.
It kind of says to me that it's like he's trying to get them jealous. It doesn't, I don't know. Sorry, never mind. I kind of lost the thought on that.
Oh, no, it's okay. Maybe it'll come back.
That's what it is, that Moses's law is all well and good, but there's now Christ.
Yes.
And, need to open your eyes and see that.
Yes, exactly.
Things change.
Well, in this Bible that I'm reading, the Catholic version, there's a footnote that says that that Paul is not abandoning Israel despite their lack of faith in God's act of Christ, and that he's telling them that the Mosaic law is kind of come to an end, and they now have to look to God through Jesus for salvation.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But here also says that by the word end, he doesn't mean it's an end. It's needs to be more broadened into a more of an idea of faith in Jesus rather than ending all the laws.
Mm-hmm. It's always a delicate. Oh, go ahead, David, but you're muted. Oh, okay, sorry. You looked like you were gearing up for a wise statement. No, nothing wise today. Well, then let the unwise speak. I'm just going to say that again, the holding intention is the phrase I learned in seminary, and I just referred to that a lot because there's no other way to say it, which is you do have the 10 Commandments, the law, the Jewish law. And at the same time, it's held in tension with this concept that Paul is trying to seek more Christians, more believers of Jesus. I wonder if the risk is, a practicing Jew was going to say they need to submit to Judaism, and Paul is saying they need to submit to the love of Christ in many ways. That's a bit of a juggling act that Paul is up to here, because he is trying to grow the church and spread it, but it also involves a kind of a I said submit, maybe that's not the right word, but that the belief in Christ, that his death and resurrection meant something and meant salvation, is kind of key to that understanding as well.
Well, it doesn't, I would assume that Paul is not denying the fact that Jesus was Jewish, but that they need to look at what he was saying as broadening their view of what God's love and laws and forgiveness and is meant to be.
Yeah, certainly.
That's kind of what at the heart of the Romans is. One of the things is that there's this is the controversy between the Jews and the Gentiles. In fact, this follows a time when the Jews were basically thrown out of Rome. There was an emperor, and he removed all the Jews out of Rome for a time. So for a short time, the Christian church in Rome was basically being run by the Gentiles. And then the occasion of this book is that Jews are being allowed back in. And so seems to be that there's a controversy about how the church is going to be led from this point. And as we've already alluded to, the Jews are more or less, some of them at least, they're expressing the idea that you have to become a Jew in order to be a Christian, and that they are they're the rightful heirs of the gospel, and so that they're going to have to do it in this way. But I think Paul is trying to tamp that controversy down and saying that the fact that the Jews were the people of God was based on the fact that they were supposed to be light to the rest of the world. They weren't supposed to be in charge so much as an example, and they didn't always live up to that example. And now Paul is saying now in Christ, there's no distinction. It's a matter of grace. It's a matter of faith and love, not a matter of compliance with the legal definition of the law. Yeah, I don't think he's trying to argue that the Jews can't still follow the law. That can be part of their practice. But I think he's trying to say that Gentiles don't need to do that. That's not where it's coming from.
I'm sneaking a peek at one of my favorite companion books I photocopied. It is definitely a textbook, but if you don't have this, I'm looking at you, David. It's well worth having. An Introduction to the New Testament by Raymond Brown. Raymond Brown. It's about 30 years old, but it is a magnificent, big, giant book to carry with you. And in here, he just gives a little bit of a nugget that kind of reminded me that it's not very apparent in here what kind of Paul's talking about, mostly in verses 9 to 13. But he's talking about, again, the works righteousness argument. So remember the idea that if to distill it down to its binary form, do you have faith? Let me see. It's God. Are you righteous because of what you do or your works to kind of whatever impress God or be better or whatnot, or are you righteous because of the grace of God and the grace freely given? And, this is talk about things held in tension a lot. The church has swung like a pendulum about this issue for many, many times throughout millennia. And this is what Ray Brown says. Paul continues by emphasizing the futility of seeking to be righteous before God on the basis of works. Whereas if you profess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. In this, you, quote unquote, there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. And all of this fulfills what he's actually quoting is from the book of Joel in the Old Testament. For everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So again, he's just kind of inserting that argument back in that there's nothing, for Paul, there's nothing you need to do other than accept that God has grace, God is giving you grace, God loves you, however you want to phrase that, and believe it. You don't have to go out and do physical acts in order to make it better or make it stronger or anything.
Yeah, I like that verse 9
Yeah,
because I feel like a lot of us are like, well, just what do I have to do?
right.
Like, what do I have to believe? What do I have to do? And he sums it up just in one verse.
Right.
Do this and do that, and you're saved.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it is a bit of a kind of a cowbell for evangelical side or maybe even Baptist to say, you know, accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. But it kind of finds its beginnings here. We talked about that before, that this book is a very very key text for evangelical Christians. All right. Moving on, verse 14 to 21. Would anyone like to read from their book? Maybe Carol, would you read from your New American Bible, the Catholic Bible? Great.
But how can they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how can they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone to preach? And how can people preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. But not everyone has heeded the good news, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what was heard from us? Thus, faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word of Christ. But I ask, did they not hear? Certainly they did, for their voice has gone forth to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. But I ask, did not Israel understand? First Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With a senseless nation, I will make you angry. Then Isaiah speaks boldly and says, I was found by those who were not seeking me. I revealed myself to those who were not asking for me. But regarding Israel, he says, all day long, I stretched out my hands to a disobedient and contentious people.
So in my book, a lot of, starting with verse 18 to 20, a lot of his quotes there are offset. So just kind of illustrating again that Paul is quoting the Old Testament word for word from whatever version he has, possibly from memory. More likely he had a physical book with him.
As I should have said quote.
Oh, no, it's okay. No, you did great. But I think it's helpful when the editors of whatever Bible put things in,
Right.
You know, they kind of lay it out like that so you can see. And for example, John 1 is often now written almost like verses of a poem, which is how it was intended to be. Excuse me. So he's getting into an argument again, or not getting into an argument. He's laying out an argument more like a prosecutor kind of, that of kind of parsing out whether Israel, ancient Israel at the time of Moses, were really, what do I want to say, listening, or even time of the prophets. And Raymond Brown's companion, he says, Paul offers Israel little excuse. The gospel was preached already by the prophets, but Israelites did not believe. They cannot even have the alibi of not understanding, for they are a disobedient and defiant people, while the foolish nation of the Gentiles has responded. And, that's Paul kind of being ironic, the quote unquote foolish nation are actually the ones with more belief. He's kind of painting that kind of argument.
Isn't that kind of the same way as like when a person decides to convert to another religion, they end up being more devout than person that was born into that religion?
Yeah.
Yeah. No zealot.
No zealot like a convert, Charity said. Yeah. It's true. all the, even in denominations, when I was in seminary and still to this day, I grew up in the church, but I've realized quickly I have a lot to learn, because the people that came to the denomination a lot sooner, especially on things like worship and canons and stuff, they know that stuff better than I do, because there's a more hunger for it,
I think it's interesting to note that we were just talking about earlier that the fact that salvation is based on confession and faith in Jesus. It's a gift of grace, and it's it comes by God's gracious favor that we are saved. But that doesn't indicate that we can slip into antinomianism, which is the word for anti-law, in the sense that it doesn't matter what we do. It does very much matter what we do, but what we do is not accomplished simply by living according to a law or regulations. What enables us to be obedient and faithful and loving people is by the gracious gift of God through faith. So it's not a matter of you don't have to live a certain way, that's not important, but it's a matter of that's not what motivates us or enables us to live that way. It's not just a code, it's the grace that God gives us.
Yeah.
I've always had a hard time with that ideology that all you have to have is faith and belief in Jesus and not do good works. But I guess I figure that if you really truly have faith and belief in Jesus and God's grace and God's love, then the good works just flow out of you naturally. People that say they believe in God and Jesus, but then act like they're not Christian, I don't really truly believe that they believe what they say.
The Epistle of James would certainly agree with you.
Yes. And the Epistle of James talks a bit more about works, kind of an argument for that. Martin Luther would disagree. Is that right? Yeah. But you're right. I think I couldn't have said it any better, Carol, that it's it's kind of there lurking underneath it all is the argument that you should be a good person, you should do good things, good works, if you will, because that's who you are, not because you're trying to score points. Deja vu, right?
Yeah.
From
Greg,
Sunday. Yes, Susan.
Greg, wouldn't it be emulating Jesus though, in order to do all those good works, to feed the poor, comfort the sick, help the downtrodden?
Right.
You believe in Jesus and you want to emulate him, then you have to do those. Those are what you would naturally do.
Right. Exactly. I think if Paul were around, I would venture to say he'd be concerned about those who do those things, but then also maybe oppress or ostracize, you name it, insert everything here, LGBT, women, people of color, blah, blah, blah. And that unfortunately, we see that a lot in Christian churches. And you kind of use all the good things you're doing as kind of a protective armor to kind of say, well, I'm a good person, I do these good things. And it's like, well, Christ is kind of a completely good person in many ways, loving the outcasts, welcoming those disagrees with, and also feeding the poor and doing all those things. So I think Paul's trying to get in and skewer the ones who were doing it with kind of hollow purposes. Yeah.
I don't want to wander into charities territory and go into book club for tomorrow night.
Oh, wander away.
I just finished the second chapter in Wisdom Jesus, and she talks about the 360-degree variations of the beliefs of Christianity, Western Christianity being one arm of it, Asian Christianity, African Christianity, and the Greek Eastern Orthodoxes. And she says of the four that they're there, Paul, he emphasizes the Western belief in that Jesus is the way to salvation, whereas all the other three emphasize becoming wise like Jesus, not just saying you believe in Jesus, but searching to become wise like Jesus.
Right.
So I found that interesting that she's kind of dissing Paul in there in a way.
Clarifying, maybe not dissing. Yeah.
Well, I think she just talks about how Paul was Jewish and Roman,
Right.
and the idea that you could codify things
Yep.
was appealing to him and appealing to a lot of us who also kind of want
Right.
it laid out that way. But everything develops in a cultural context.
Yeah.
And, even the way, we sit and read
Right.
for worship, that's sort of a very Western way of doing it. We don't get up and dance. I mean, we do.
Well,
some of
Ella
us sing
does,
well.
yeah.
Ella, see, I think that's beautiful.
I know.
And so I think, her idea that all of this is in a cultural context, and we've followed certain lines because we're in a similar culture.
Right.
But yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying the book, Carol.
Yeah.
I am.
Or maybe we should be more fair to Paul and say perhaps it's not what Paul was saying so much in and of himself, but how he's been interpreted through
Yeah.
Western
Fair point.
Christianity.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
Yeah,
I can see why she likes the Gospel of Thomas, because wasn't Thomas the one that went to India? I mean, Paul went to Rome, Thomas went to India, right?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember.
He was sent out when he was sent out to do his preaching. His assignment was to go east. I thought he was stoned in India when he died.
That's the
You
tradition.
would know. You grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't know. They didn't teach us that in ours.
Chapter 5 in that book is all about Thomas.
Oh,
Get there,
you read
yeah.
ahead.
But yeah, she pulls in from a lot of sources.
That's awesome.
But
My interest is piqued.
I love
Start
this
reading.
idea about what is your motivation for good works?
Right.
Right.
And I think the motivation is important,
Mhm.
because are you doing it because it's just springing out of you naturally and it's sustainable and loving? Or, because I think all of us, I'll put myself in it, you want to do good things so the people around you think you're good.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're doing good things, but you're doing it in a way that's controlling or not honoring the people around you. Like, I'm going to help you the way I think you need help. And I see people in other churches I've been in, they would say that about LGBT people. No, we're loving them because we're going to stop their sin.
Right.
That it's not a loving
Right.
thing to encourage someone on a path to damnation.
Yep.
They honestly believe
Yeah.
they're being loving.
Mhm.
But I think your motivation at that point, are you doing it because you think that's what you should be doing because you're following a rule? Or are you doing it because you have embraced the love of Christ in your heart
Yeah.
and just a natural, gentle outpouring of love?
Right.
That's a hard place to be in, and it's a really hard place to stay in.
It is.
Because everybody burns out and you end up committing to something when you have a wellspring.
Right.
And then you're like, gotta keep doing it.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Go ahead, Susan.
A question for you and for David. We know that the Old Testament has all of these rules against. Is there anywhere in any of Jesus's Gospels where he preaches against another race, other people, other ways of life? I think from what I kind of absorbed as my inner, is that Jesus had no conflict with anyone, that they were all children of God, no matter what color they were, no matter what their beliefs or sexual preferences were.
Yeah, but
There are some passages that indicate that Jesus talked about coming first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. And there's one passage where he deals with the woman who comes for healing, and he says that he's supposed to minister to the Jews, and she says, well, even the puppies from the table, get the
That's what I was going to say.
But exactly, and so
Clarity.
there there are verses that are used that way, Susan, but I think the vast majority of his actions, you see how he reacts with the Syrophoenician woman and then with, and other people, that I think the bulk of his ministry shows that he doesn't show preference, that's not something that we should be doing. He says nothing at all about LGBTQ. That's not even something he addresses in the least. So there are some passages that people can use to show a more exclusionary Jesus, but I think the bulk of the narrative, puts well, I shouldn't say a lie, but anyway, at least indicates that that's not where Jesus' heart really was. And remember one other thing I think that we could keep in mind, if you're comfortable with it, that Jesus was raised a Jew, he was born a Jew, and even though the fact that he was God and man, he was man. And I think in some ways Jesus himself developed in his theology in this regard. He when he was in his discussion with the one woman, I think she taught him a lesson as well. So I think his understanding grew and developed as well. Greg, what do you have to say about that?
I was going to point to that exact phrase, that passage too, the Syrophoenician woman. I think it's in John, it might be Luke. And it's, Susan, you'll remember, this is where what David was referring to. This is where we get the prayer in Rite One's Eucharist about we are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under thy table. Kind of comes from that. That's what the woman says to Jesus. I've preached on it in the past and argued through some exegesis that Jesus might be saying it with a kind of a wink to the listener, to say, we're not supposed to give scraps to people like you, and kind of like saying, this is what we teach, and then gives her an opportunity to profess her faith even stronger. But I also love the idea that he's not perfect because he's human as well, and perfect in this respect, and grows in his own understanding. And then the other passage I would say is that I don't have much of a command on is his encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well, is kind of shows a little hints of, you could interpret misogyny and kind of his bias, but all of that has to be carefully leavened with understanding that it could be the author of the gospel kind of putting some words in Jesus's mouth. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just remember that you're in the hands of a storyteller. It's not Jesus himself telling his own story. So yeah, it's hard. And again, all of it is taken with the overwhelming witness of Jesus being inclusive and caring for the marginalized and the downtrodden. And think about how he ends his life in all the Gospels, which is especially in Luke, with forgiveness and second chances and all that. That's the takeaway.
Thank you.
Good question. Great question.
And I just add to that, where you say there might be hints of misogyny. I would say that if you viewed that from a contemporary lens, that might be the case. But if you viewed it from a the historical context, the fact that Jesus was even willing to speak to a woman,
exactly,
unaccompanied, and a Samaritan woman, and ask her for water, that was very much breaking of all the cultural traditions, the misogyny that you're talking about. So exactly. In the context, that was, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say, go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leslie.
No, the only thing I was thinking of was, on a different note, was where Jesus said, woe to the Pharisees, and he has a whole long list of woes that against the Pharisees, and I'm not sure yeah. So, but anyway, so he is more or less condemning people who are making sure that the laws are followed, where like the disciples weren't washing their hands or before a meal, or he was healing on the Sabbath and things like that, where and he's just like, and I don't remember where it is, whether it's in Luke or somewhere, but he has this woes to the especially the Pharisees, because they are trying to make everybody follow the rules.
Right. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna add to what David said, that I think in both where he meets the woman at the well and the woman who wants the scraps from the table, I think there's something about those exchanges where he meets her as an equal, they have an intellectual debate. And if you were considering yourself, as a Jewish man of the time, probably did, or at least was encouraged to culturally, engaging those women in a even intellectual debate where their opinions were heard
Mhm.
and absorbed for what they meant and honored, just to open your mind that much. I mean, I've worked with people who aren't capable of that now,
Yeah.
just to hear what you're saying and listen to you. And I think that's just a really beautiful part of those exchanges. So
Yeah.
that's all.
Oh, that's beautiful. Any other thoughts, anyone?
We got through
Questions?
10.
We got through 10. That clock's a little slow. Well, it probably, instead of starting 11, we'll just call it a day there. I'm not here next week. I'm in Denver for both a conference and to see my now 1-year-old nephew, River. So I'll be with you in spirit, and blessings upon all of the technology next week. It's going to be great. It's going to work out perfectly.
We'll manage.
That's it.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take care, everyone. It was a great week.
You
See
too.
you this weekend.
Bye.
Bye.